our decisions and our behaviour are profoundly shaped by environment, by the context around us. And when you look at many accepted aspects of organisational life, they tend to take a purely rational, logical view of human nature.
Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to GovComms, a podcast about the function and practice of communication in government and the public sector. My name is David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where we are broadcasting from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the ongoing contribution they make to the life of our city and this region. I'd also like to pay my respects to all First Nations people of the lands from where anyone listening to this podcast is joining us from today. So, what if everything you thought you knew about effective communication was wrong? Think about it. A well-crafted, evidence-based message distributed on multiple online and offline channels in various formats over time, but nothing changes. No one cares. People don't open the email. They scroll past, not stopping to watch, to listen, or to read. And if they do stop, they forget. They don't act, and your carefully crafted plans are wasted. Now, add to that very modern challenge of finding your place amidst the volume and velocity of content created by artificial intelligence. Government communicators, like all people working in communication, must now answer the question of how do you stay relevant and effective? How do you find reliable ways to explain policy, programs, services and regulation? How do you earn the right to a person's most valuable asset, which is their time and their attention, so people can understand what governments are doing and why? The path to trust is through relevance and reliability, but in this hyper-contested world fueled by technology, it makes the job just that little bit harder every day. But on the plus side, get it right and the rewards are manifest. Modern content moves at light speed, and if it meets a need, it can and will perform. James Healy is the founder and managing director of the Behaviour Boutique, a company that helps organisations use behavioural science to meet the moment in culture, technology, AI readiness and decision-making. James co-founded Deloitte's first global behaviour change service using insights from anthropology, behavioural economics, psychology, and more to help organisations to first understand and then tackle their biggest challenges. James has worked in over 60 countries across industries including banking, mining, health, education, government, and aged care. He's a speaker, an author, and the host of the B Word podcast. He has written or contributed to 3 books, including BS at Work and Adopting AI, the People First Approach. He joins me from his office in Perth, Western Australia. James, welcome to GovComms.
David, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So listen, I like to get to know our guests a little bit at the beginning and their journey into their expertise. So how is it that you found your way into the behaviour space? Was it a teacher at school? Was it a lecturer at university? Was it a friend? Was it a girlfriend? How is it that you found your way on this path?
It is a great question. So you actually hit the nail on the head there with a lecturer at university. It was actually a class teacher, my first year economics class. And I was at the London School of Economics and Political Science. I was finding first year economics pretty easy because I had done economics in high school and I was 19 years old and there wasn't much that I didn't know about the world. I was pretty smart. And about 2/3 of the way through my first year, this economics tutor who didn't much like me, it has to be said, for reasons that are probably apparent now. He took me on one side and told me, James, I just need you to understand something. Oh yes, what's that? Well, I just need you to understand that while you are going to sail through first year economics, you are going to fail second and third year economics unless you stop thinking about what people do and start focusing more on the maths. Economics is about equations and graphs. You're not thinking about equations and graphs. You're thinking about what people do. And I have to say, he wasn't wrong. I am many things, but I'm not a mathematician. And my mathematics failure led to me dropping economics and doing a philosophy degree. And about towards the end of my third year, towards the end of my philosophy degree, I did a course called Scientific Revolutions. And it was essentially looking at the philosophy of science through those seismic moments in the history of ideas when science took a leap forward. So Newton, Copernicus, Galileo, Einstein, all of those figures that everyone has heard of, even if they can't explain why. And after going through 2 terms of looking at all of these incredibly famous names, we turned up one week and there was a paper we were supposed to read by 2 Israeli psychologists. Like, who are these guys? Wow, we've really scraped in the bottom of the barrel here. Like they've run out of proper scientists, and now we've got this Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Who's ever heard of them? Well, it turns out a lot of people have heard of them, and Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. Ironically, the same year that I was asking who the hell this guy is. Turns out I didn't know as much as I thought I did.
So how then, once you found or discovered an interest in people, in behavioural science, that would have been pretty early in the piece in terms of, it's now a very well established practice. It's very credible because of Tversky and Kahneman. But back then, where was the opportunity, or wasn't there opportunity? Wasn't there an opportunity?
If there was an opportunity, I didn't see it for quite some time.
Yeah.
And
okay.
What I would say is, I think like a lot of people who end up in the field, I think what happened to me is fairly common in that I had always been really interested in humans and human behavior. I sort of assumed that everyone was. And it was only as time went on, and I spent the first 14 years of my career in big banks in London and Singapore. And by the way, if you're interested in human behavior, the trading floor of a large investment bank it's like the Serengeti for zoologists. It's
yeah, I can imagine.
But
were you able to find your way into this work through the big banks, or were you competing on the floor? As a trader?
No, I was not working as a trader. I worked in operations initially, and then I very quickly got into project roles. So I was trying to implement technology, change culture, implement regulatory change. I had a front row seat for the collapse of Lehman and the crisis that followed, and then did a lot of work over many years trying to implement some of the regulatory changes that happened as a result of that. I, as I say, was always interested in human behavior. I was using some of these techniques that I had read about and learned about in my spare time without necessarily telling people what they were. But like many people in many spheres, I think I learned more about what not to do. And I vividly remember having a conversation with a senior trader at Credit Suisse. We were implementing a new policy and a new system, and we were trying to change something. I don't need to go into the details of what we're trying to change, but this trader took me on one side and said, it's all very well you waving that policy around, but we get paid millions of dollars to do something that you're telling us we can't do. How well do you think that piece of paper is going to change behavior around here? And it's hard to admit, but he kind of had a point.
So how then did you go from that journey then of understanding that the policy had to change? The incentives were clearly misaligned with the intent of the policy. how either in this example or you can tell another story about another example where you were able to, move people by understanding human behaviour.
So if I think about my career up to about 6 or 7 years ago, I had spent a lot of time in various contexts around various initiatives asking the same question. And the question is, does anybody really think this is going to work? And this took various forms. It could be policy, it could be e-learnings, it could be all manner of new technology implementations. But I spent more and more of my time in that gap between the accepted way of doing things and the reality of implementation. And what I came to understand was that question, does anybody really think this is going to work, has only two possible answers. Yes, somebody somewhere thinks that we are actually going to change people's behavior by writing it in this policy that sits on a SharePoint. Or no, everybody knows deep down that this isn't going to work, but we're doing it anyway for some other reason. And what I came to understand, David, was it's a real toss-up as to which of those answers is a more damning indictment of organizational life.
So in your book, BS at Work, you do argue that a lot of what we describe as modern work is actually broken. Can you unpack that for us? And what makes it BS?
So at the heart of behavioral economics and behavioral science, and at the heart of that conversation that I had with that university supervisor all those years ago, is conflicting views of human nature. And the sort of classical economics view of human nature is that we are rational calculation machines. We all go through life with perfect information, with perfect decision-making ability, and we rationally calculate and weigh up pros and cons before everything that we do. That is wildly inaccurate. And really the whole thrust of behavioral economics and behavioral science more broadly is that humans aren't rational calculation machines. We are social, emotional, tribal storytelling animals. And many of our decisions happen automatically. Our decisions and our behavior are profoundly shaped by environment, by the context around us. And when you look at many accepted aspects of organizational life, they tend to take a purely rational, logical view of human nature. If we put something in a policy, if we tell people what we want them to do, they'll be able to do it. The CEO of Bayer, the huge German agricultural and pharmaceuticals conglomerate, which has been around for more than 100 years, they had a new CEO start maybe about 18 months ago now. And he has kicked off a gigantic transformation of that organization. And the story that he told at the launch event for that transformation, I think was very instructive. And I think it sums up much of what's wrong with many organizations. Bayer has an employee handbook which runs to 1,362 pages. In the words of their CEO, it's longer than War and Peace and not nearly as entertaining. Now, that's one organization. I don't think it's unique. We tend to have this assumption that if it's written down on a piece of paper somewhere, people will read it, they will remember it, they will understand it, and they will action it. Much of what's wrong with organizations falls into the gap between intention and action.
But how then do you break that mindset to enrich decision-making and discussions at all levels of an organisation? And I'd be, if you do have any more insights in how Bayer is going to go about making this transformation, I'd be fascinated as to what their planning is and what they're going to do with the 1,362-page doorstop, and, what's in and what's out. Because often what we see in a lot of the work that we do is that you get to particular subject matter experts, and in their particular part of the world, no, this has to stay in. No, this is very, very important, and it all has to go in. And it's very hard to have those conversations with people, because then you move to the next person and they're like, oh, yeah, you can get rid of half of that person's stuff, but not my stuff. That's different. That's really important. So as long as you put all my stuff in, and it becomes, particularly in bureaucracies, it becomes a real challenge to move people to that aligned vision, getting people sort of hands in the middle, understanding where we're going and making decisions in the wider context rather than in their own part of an enterprise.
So, David, I'm going to pick up on one word that you said there, and the word is context. True story, by the way. You mentioned my podcast series, The B Word. If it's not obvious, the B word is behavior. I wanted to call it originally the C word. But for some reason, that didn't get the requisite approvals. The C word, of course, listeners, please get your minds out of the gutter. The C word is context. Context is key. And if you were to try, and it would be hugely intellectually arrogant and foolish to do so, but I'm going to do it anyway. If you were to try and summarize behavioral science in one sentence, it would be that context is key. Context shapes behavior. And so often in organizations and in society more broadly, we tell people what we want them to do and why we want them to do it, but we don't change the context to make it easy for them to do what we want them to do and make it hard for them to do the things that we don't want them to do. And so in an organizational context, there is a vast array of factors that influence people's behavior day to day. But I want the listeners to think about examples that might spring to their minds of instances where their employer has told them, we want you to do X, Y, Z, but then the systems and the processes make it very hard for them to do that. The incentives really don't align with the intention. So you end up in this scenario where we're telling people very earnestly in lots of ways, we want you to do something. And then we're making it very hard for you to do it. And we're rewarding you and recognizing you for doing the opposite. And you're seeing leaders get promoted for doing the opposite. And you're seeing them continue to do the opposite.
Is it that you're looking to change the context or more connect people to the context, to the reality of this is what's actually happening and this is why we need to change, that perhaps in many cases, particularly when it's related to external context and for example, what we're all dealing with at the moment, the behaviour of the President of the United States and the decision-making is not leading to great stability. And on any given day, people don't know whether it's, is it 10% tariff, is it a 20% tariff? Is it that stopping, is that's not stopping? So there's, how do you get people to understand, or how do you get people to operate effectively when essentially they have no control over that wider context and they can't change it? Even if they wanted to change it, they can't.
I think that's a great point. I think in organizations, we tend to have a lot more control of context. Certainly leaders within organizations have more control of context than governments do. And one of the paradoxes of behavioral science is over the last 20 years, behavioral economics, behavioral science, I use the term somewhat interchangeably, have got great traction primarily and firstly in government. So the Australian government has at least 15, if not more, behavioural economics teams, both at Commonwealth and at state level. The UK had the Behavioural Insights team, which starts it all. According to the OECD, there's something like 400 behavioural economics teams in government and adjacent to government around the world. It's still very new and very niche within organizations, which is kind of strange because I think it will be more effective within organizations because they have more control of the context. Now, in terms of the example that you cite, the 47th President of the United States, as we all know, that's a whole million episode series of podcasts in and of itself trying to understand his behavior. But I am reminded of a conversation I once had with Gillian Tett. So Gillian Tett was until recently the US editor of the Financial Times. She has a PhD in anthropology from Cambridge, I believe. And of all the millions of words that I've read and heard spoken about that particular individual, she said something to me that has always stuck with me that I think is really key to understanding him. You cannot understand him without understanding the context from which he came. That Manhattan real estate, edge of the law kind of world, Roy Cohn as his lawyer and mentor. But above all, you can't understand him without understanding that he came through WWE wrestling. And in the 80s and 90s, he was a regular fixture in that kind of fake wressling world.
Pantomime.
Correct.
It was a pantomime.
Correct. And you see at various points, her name is something McMahon. She's a Linda McMahon, I think. Oh, yeah. She's a senior.
Yeah, it is.
I forget what role she has now. Transport, education. Yeah.
I think she's the education secretary now.
Which makes perfect sense, David, because, she's got a long and deep experience in WWE wrestling. But the word that you use there, pantomime, the word, and I had to look this up after this conversation, the word is kayfabe. So kayfabe defines the wrestling world. And it is a world in which everybody knows that it's fake, but everybody tacitly agrees to pretend that it's real. And it is a world where people casually throw out grotesque insults at each other, but it's all a pantomime, as you say. And you cannot understand Donald Trump without understanding that that's the game he's playing. None of this is real for him. This is all just part of that kayfabe. You saw it recently when Biden, when it was announced that Biden has late-stage cancer. A couple of hours previously, Trump had been busy on social media ranting about Biden in that unhinged way that he has. As soon as this news came out, he actually posted a very kind of heartfelt and seemingly genuine message, sharing his sympathy. It might look like hypocrisy to the rest of us. It might look like wild inconsistency, and on one level it is. His context, his worldview is shaped by kayfabe.
But how then do you explain something like that? Why is it that people would knowingly suspend belief in pursuit of recreation? Where is it in someone's emotional makeup? What need is being satisfied by taking that action?
So I would argue that to a greater or lesser extent, it is something that we all do in different ways, in different scenarios. Humans are storytelling animals. We make sense of the world around us by telling stories. We are all constantly telling a story about our own lives in which we are the hero. I'm a big sports fan, and I'm very sensitive to the occasional critiques I've had from colleagues over the years who are not sports fans, who say things like, the classic is, man kicks ball, so what, who cares? They are, of course, accurate. We watch sport, we listen to commentary, we read all about sport. It's all about crafting a narrative. It's all about creating drama. And there is nothing, I would argue, like professional top-level sport to create drama, but so much of that drama is confected. It's a story. It's the redemption arc of the fallen hero. It's the returning to his old club to take revenge. It's the last gasp of the aging superstar who's fading. There's a million narratives. They are all narratives. At the end of the day, what's actually happening is someone's hitting a ball or kicking a ball or catching a ball or whatever it is. But we infuse it with meaning.
Yeah, that's true. But I actually have I've worked in professional rugby union for almost 30 years, and I was an advisor to Eddie Jones for about 18 years. And so I ran a lot of my work with him was to run the narrative, which was really about how do we capture the attention on a daily basis. Because we wanted to be in the news. We wanted people talking about the game. We wanted to find where that narrative momentum was, such that if we told a good story that was going to interest people in whichever form it was, then we would be able to influence the various audiences who we were seeking to influence, whether it was our own players, whether it was our own administration, whether it was the opposition. That was obviously a frequent target, trying to make their weeks a little more unstable than they would like it otherwise. But my experience was always that we needed to be close to the truth we were always our most effective when we were closest to what was true. Making things up, like we never bothered to make things up like KFAB because that just wouldn't float. And maybe it's just because it's in that different context of world wrestling, but certainly in the world of professional rugby, seeking to engage our audiences, you really did need to find the edges of the narrative, but they needed to be grounded in realism. You needed to tell stories that people could see. Was really what we would generally try to do, is to create this imagery in people's minds, so as that they would go, oh yeah, I can see that. That's real, but that's a long way away from kayfabe. So explain that to me. Why was it that we needed to stay true to authority and authenticity, as opposed to world wrestling, which operates in a completely different world? So
I would argue that this has a lot to do with the tribal nature of human nature. And right. You think about someone like Trump, when he speaks, and this is true of any politician, right? But when a politician speaks, when Trump speaks, which audience is he speaking to? Is he speaking to whichever world leader is standing mortified next to him, wishing the ground would swallow them up? Is he speaking to his opponents, or is he speaking to his supporters? And similarly, you talk about Eddie Jones or any sporting figure. Are you speaking to your team? Are you speaking to your fans?
Yeah.
Are you speaking to to your employers at times? Are you sending a message to the powers that be?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's all of those things, right?
It is. Yep. It was.
And you think about with Trump, so much of what he says, and this, by the way, this will be the clickbait clip that you can package up and will go viral. James Healy says, there are things which Trump says which are absolutely false on a practical level, but speak to, at least for his supporters, a deeper truth. And the classic example here is all of the absolutely wild stuff, the conspiracy stuff, and the QAnon stuff, which I won't repeat on here because it'll get us censored and it'll kill the algorithm. But it's absolute nonsense when you state it objectively. But it speaks to a deeper truth that appeals to many Americans, and I think many citizens in many countries, which is, it feels like things are out of control. It feels like things are going badly for us. It feels like there is some secret cabal controlling things for their own interests. And humans have shown this throughout our entire history, people are pretty good at suspending reality in service of some deeper truth, or in service of shared beliefs that bind them together with a group.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Working it back to the lives and the work of people working in government communication who are packaging up the content to explain the policies, the programs, the service and regulation, operating in this high-speed world where, there's just demand for lots of information, and government holds a lot of valuable information. So there is often an audience for that information. Just as we wrap it up, what advice would you give to those people working in those teams as to how to most simply and most effectively apply some of the shortcuts, I suppose, that they can apply in their day-to-day work that enable them to be more effective in being able to craft the messages? So as I said at the beginning, they're not ignored, that they are seen, that they are understood. What might be your best advice to them?
So I would say two things here. Firstly, never ignore supposedly irrelevant factors. We tend to focus so much, and we've all done this, whether at work or in our personal lives, whether, crafting a message for a huge public announcement or crafting a message to someone close to us, we tend to fixate on the content. And we often tend to ignore the timing. We tend to ignore the format. We sometimes ignore who is sending the message. All of those factors can be far more important than the content, depending on the context. The best way to think about those factors is a framework, and this is an open source public framework. It's produced by the Behavioural Insights team. It's called the EAST framework. Make it easy, make it attractive, make it social, make it timely. So make it easy for people to access, make it easy for people to read and understand, make it easy for them to remember. That might be a handy mnemonic like EAST. It might be a fun little song like Dumb Ways to Die. It might be all manner of things. Make it attractive. Make people want to read it. Make people want to find out more. Make people curious about what's coming next or about what's in there. Make it different. Make it funny. Make it unexpected. Make it social. So use social identity. Use personal identity. Just the very act of addressing something to someone by name piques their interest. If we're trying to change behavior, giving the impression, and we need to be honest about this, but we can use it to our advantage, giving the impression that most people are doing the thing that we want them to do encourages other people to do it. And make it timely. Sending an email to your boss with something really important that you need an opinion on at 5:00 on a Friday is not a good idea. Publishing some big story on the same day as the grand final or the election is a surefire way that it's going to get buried. Think about the right time. If you want people to change their behavior, prompt them at times when they are open to change. Could be the start of a new year, the start of a month. No one ever started an exercise and fitness program on a Wednesday. Everybody always starts on a Monday.
That's a very good point. So listen, James, I thank you so much. And I have a heap more questions to get to. So I think we're going to have to make a second appointment as we sort of start to delve into the world of artificial intelligence and everything that comes with that, from a tool to assist communicators and a tool to bring meaning and productivity and coherence, and to be able to really understand it a little bit more. I think we're all sort of, dabbling on the edges, but everyone keeps telling us that, you ain't seen nothing yet. So staying open-minded, staying curious, staying engaged, and taking some of the advice that you've just given people. I think those basic, a mnemonic like an EAST, that's very accessible. I can understand that. I can apply it more broadly and generally to a whole sort of different tasks. And your last point there about timeliness, I think we're only, I know in a lot of the other content that we create here at Content Group, the shelf life of content in this day and age, it goes out a bit. It loses its value very quickly. We move on so quickly in this day and age of this accelerated day and age. And if you're not finding the right time with your story in the right format, in the right channel, expressed, as you say, designed beautifully, accessible, and, social, connecting to identity and needs, well, you're just not going to get there. And it's building that muscle, I find. We're having some fun at the moment with a new podcast and social channels that we've created, and just trying to rise to the challenge of, okay, how do we do this? How do we attract new audiences? How do we build those audiences? How do we get people coming back? How do we make sure that we stay relevant in these different places where people are? Expecting that people are going to be coming to your website and engaging in, the 45-page discussion paper. Well, maybe they will. But yeah, it's such a changing world. And I think behavioural science, behavioural economics, and as you say, particularly in the public sector, there's a real appetite, particularly around stakeholder engagement and the understanding of audiences. It's a fundamental. The Australian government has now made stakeholder engagement don't bring us a policy unless you're able to show us the evidence where you've been able to go out and meaningfully engage with audiences, so as that you're gathering that evidence, which is helping you to make ultimately those policy and program and regulatory decisions and the content and communication decisions to support that work as well. But anyway, great conversation, mate. I thank you so much. That was, just really valuable, I think. And it's just such a key part of the work of communications professionals. It's really now, change, whatever you want to call it. It's all now sort of rolled into the one. I don't think we respect lanes anymore. You do have to have these skills. So where might people best be able to learn a little bit more, to follow you, to get access to your broadcasting and some of your writings as well?
Well, thank you, David. They can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. The B Word is the podcast. It's available on Apple, Spotify, and all good podcast hosts. And the new book is BS at Work, Why So Much of Modern Work is BS, and How Behavioural Science Can Make It Better. And that's available on Amazon. Thank you.
Tremendous. Well, James, thank you so much. James Healy there from the Behaviour Boutique. And I'm sure if you reach out on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find James there. And I'm sure he'd be happy to take a question, take a phone call and just get involved. People are passionate about this type of work. And I find that people like James are often very willing to share their knowledge and their insights. And I'm sure there's a lot of very valuable information in his book, but also published on LinkedIn. And I've actually subscribed this afternoon to the B Word, and I've got it locked and loaded for this afternoon. So I'll be, as on the drive home, be listening a couple of those interviews. So listen, audience, thank you so much. As always, grateful as ever for you to come back and listen to another great story from the world of government communications. There's nothing more important, really, as we seek to deal with context. James made a very good point about just, how challenging context can be and how relevant it is to the work that you do. But ultimately, those trust numbers in government, we have to make sure that we continue to work hard to build trust with communities, because that will, lay the foundations for trust and respect in government, which we all need to ensure that our democracies are functioning and they are robust. So a big thanks to you. You can, if you want to, rate or review the program. It does help us to be found. You can subscribe on your podcast catcher. So if you'd like to do that, I would certainly appreciate that. And you can find all the latest information, updates and insights and all our other GovComms episodes on LinkedIn at the GovComms Institute. So that's where you can access the now hundreds and hundreds of episodes. We've been having these conversations since 2015. Can you believe that? We've been at this for 10 years talking about government communications, and what a joy it is to talk about it, because it is so important. And in this day and age, I'm not sure that there is a more important function of government to explain to people what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. So we'll be back at the same time in a fortnight with our next guest. But for the moment, my name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.